Hey guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is a very special video. Natasha Denona has dropped her newest mini bronze palette and I am here for it. I have a few complaints, I would say, but otherwise this palette looks super beautiful, super warm tone bronzy shades. I'm basically going to tell you guys, if you do have some of the eyeshadow palettes that I'm going to talk about in today's video, if you do have those palettes, you basically can create those looks if you do not want to like run out and buy that mini Natasha Denona bronze palette. I have been like drooling on the bronze palette, the midi size one. So I was super excited when I heard this news, but I must say, I'm a little disappointed just because there's like only one shimmer. I was expecting at least two shimmers, I would say. Natasha Denona is known for like her sparkly, shimmery eyeshadow formulas. And I personally feel, let me show you the palette first of all. So as you can see, in that palette, I would say I could have done without the matte bone shade, the matte beige shade, the second shade in the palette. I would have really appreciated if there was a second bronze shade there. It's so close to being perfect. And I also feel like the first shade and the last shade it's too close to each other, but I can still appreciate one being like a warm, like a orangey terracotta shade and the other one being like a deepening matte warm brown shade. Let's talk a little more about the palette. This palette would retail for $27. Again, I think she's increased the prices because earlier the mini palettes were only $25. Now I see everything for about $27. So I'm assuming that this is also going to be $27. And this palette is going to launch on July 19th on your Sephora's website as well as Natasha Denona website. I leave all the details in the description box below for you guys. Now let me talk about the palettes that can actually dupe this palette. Now, if you guys do have the Alter Ego Canyon palette, this was a dupe from Natasha Denona Bronze palette. Again, if you do have Natasha Denona Bronze palette, the actual midi palette, I think you can actually get a very similar look with the shades that are already existing. But if you were like drooling over the Natasha Denona Bronze palette and you want like a mini version of it, I think that is also a very good curated palette for you. But again, bronze was like known for the shimmers in it, and I absolutely feel that I can achieve like an Natasha Denona mini bronze eye look using this palette. So again, this would be my first alternative. So let me show you the shades that would correspond to the shades. The first shade in the Natasha Denona Mini Bronze palette is called Russet, and this is defined as a matte warm dark brown shade, and this is being duped by this shade which is called Russet from this palette. How ironic, right? This dark matte brown shade. So let me swatch it for you guys. I'll give you a close-up at the end of the video too. But again, that's how the shade looks. Again, it's like a matte warm brown shade. Now the second shade in the palette is called Flesh, and this is defined as a matte beige nude shade, and this is being duped by the shade which is called Rattlesnake from this palette. And this is like one shade deeper than my skin tone, so I basically would use this as a transitioning shade. If you are more of a deeper skin tone, I would say you might use this as like a brow bone shade or an inner corner shade. Now again, this is how that looks. Now the third shade in the palette is called Gobi, and this is defined as a matte medium tangerine brown shade. And I would say the closest shade to that would be Desert Sun. This one. It definitely has that warmth in the shade. I don't know if you guys can see it or not, but again, I would say this would be great for like blending out the deepening shade. So I would say again, this is Desert Sun from the Canyon palette that dupes the shade called Gobi. Now the fourth shade is the shimmer shade in the palette, and this is called Bronze Foil, and this is defined as a metallic coppery bronze shade, and this is being duped by the shade called Coyote from the Canyon palette. So let me swatch that. By the way, the eyeshadow that you're seeing on my eye look, I've used this palette on my eyes today, duping the corresponding shades. So if you are interested in the eye look, definitely do stay tuned. Again, that is the shade Coyote from the palette that dupes the shade called Bronze Foil. And the last shade in the palette is called Tough, and this is defined as a matte medium terracotta shade, and this is being duped by this shade in the palette which is called Mule. So let me swatch that, and that is the whole palette for you guys, duped by using the Shop Alter Ego Canyon palette. Now I'll give you a close-up in the outside lighting too, how everything looks. But now let's talk about the other palettes that if you do have those palettes also in your collection, you might get a similar color story. So let's first talk about the Jaclyn Hill Morphe palette, the original palette. Now again, if you do have this palette was also known for like a neutral warm tone color story. So again, I would say if you do have this palette, again, you can get a very like similar color story. So let's start off. The first shade in the palette is duped by this shade, which is called Mocha from the palette. Again, nothing special, a warm tone brown shade. And the next shade in the palette, I duped out with this shade, which is called Silk Cream. So let me swatch that. That's how it looks. These shadows are also super buttery. The next shade in the palette is duped by this shade, which is called Butter. And that's how that looks. I would say the fourth shade in the palette, the bronze shade, I would say we don't have like a closest dupe, but I would swatch this. This would be like the closest shade in that palette, I would say. So let me swatch that. There you go. And the last shade in the palette is duped by the shade Roxanne from the palette, which is this shade, a warm tone terracotta shade. So again, a very similar color story, I would say, you can achieve with this palette too. Now let's move on to the next palette that can give you a similar color story, and that would be the Sigma Ambience palette. Now if you have the Sigma Ambience palette, the first shade would be duped by the Sunspot shade, and then I would swatch this shade, which is Days, and then I would swatch the shade Daylily. So let's swatch those first. Sunspot, Days. I would say Days is a little more pale. So I'm going to mix the shade Basque also so that I get that beigey shade. And then I'm going to swatch Daylily for that warm transitioning shade. So those are how the three shades look. Next, for the bronzy shade, I would swatch the shade Marigold. For the terracotta shade, I'm going to swatch this shade, which is called Summer Solstice. And that's how the palette looks, duped using the Ambience palette from Sigma. So you get an idea. We can definitely get that similar color story. It's nothing out of the box like unusual or unique in our collection. So if you are like a more of a bronzy person, I would say yes, you do have all these shades in the palette. But if you're looking for a smaller eyeshadow palette, a curated eyeshadow palette that would give you like that bronzy goddess look, I think this is an amazing palette to have in the collection. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this like dupes video that I duped the Natasha Denona Mini Bronze palette too. So now, without further ado, let's move on to the eye look that I created with this palette. Okay, let's take the shade called Rattlesnake here from the Canyon palette. I'm going to dip that and just apply that as my crease shade. It definitely has like a beigey undertone, and that would help to mix in with my skin tone and apply as a beautiful transitioning shade. Okay, now let's dip into the shade Mule and then apply that also in our crease. I'm just taking windshield wiper motions. I'm going to take the same shade on my lower lash line too. I'm going to try to extend it so that I can like join these two points together. And now I'm going to take this shade, which is Russet from the palette, and take that on the outer corners. I'm going to concentrate the maximum on the outer corners. And just like that, and then just sweep it into the inner third of the eyelid. I'm going to take the same shade on my lower lash line, mainly on the outer corners. Now just to melt everything out, I'm going to mix this and this shade together and then just blend it right at the edge where it is meeting the lid. Again, we're doing this so that there's no harsh lines. Now I'm going to take a little more of a dense brush and take this shade that we started off with, and I'm going to take that mainly on the lid, and you can call it a day by just applying that and call it like a all matte look. But of course we have to dip into shimmers. But I did want to give you an option of like an all matte look too. Now for the shimmer, I really feel like the shimmer that she's using is very, very close to this shade, which is Coyote from the palette. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to just press that on my lid. Just like that. Now I'm just going to intensify everything that we used with no additional product and just go over the edges just to blend everything out. And that is it. Let me finish off my eyes with some liner and mascara and I'll get right back. So that's my final look. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys did have these palettes already in your collection, you don't need to like run out and buy it. Although this palette looks super beautiful, but again, do you need it? That's the whole point. I'm not going to tell you if you need it or not. I myself would not like run out and buy it, but I think if I can buy it like in a sale or something, I think I can get a great use out of this because these are like absolute my tones. So that's all for today, guys. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did like this, do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload 3 videos every single week, every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 AM Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.